The icy moon loomed large in the viewport of the celestial venture, its frozen surface reflecting the dim light of the nearby star. For most of the crew, it was just another assignment, a remote, desolate rock in an uncharted system. But for Darius Quinn, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. "Are we sure about this, Quinn?" Captain Ryan Holt's voice crackled through the ship's comms, breaking the tense silence on the bridge. "There's no guarantee anything's down there except more ice." Darius didn't look up from the holomap glowing on his console. His fingers traced the outlines of the anomaly they had detected, a buried structure deep beneath the surface. "Captain, the readings don't lie. This could be it. The archives mention an ancient cryo chamber, and it matches the location perfectly." Ryan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "And if it's just another dead end? We've spent months chasing shadows for your legends. It's worth the risk," Darius replied firmly. His green eyes burned with conviction. "If we find her, if the stories are true, she could change everything." The crew exchanged skeptical glances, but no one dared challenge him further. Darius wasn't just a skilled archaeologist. He was relentless, a man driven by something no one else fully understood. The celestial venture descended toward the moon's surface, its engines humming softly as the ship pierced the thin atmosphere. The landing was rough, the ice cracking under the ship's weight, but the crew worked quickly to secure the area. Outside, the air was bitterly cold, and every breath fogged in the frigid wind. The landscape stretched out like an endless sea of white, broken only by jagged peaks of glacial ice. Darius led the team toward the anomaly's coordinates, a massive scanner strapped to his back and determination etched on his face. Beside him walked Elena Torres, the ship's chief engineer, who muttered complaints about the equipment freezing up. "This better not be another wild goose chase," Elena said, her voice muffled by her helmet. "It won't be," Darius said without hesitation. When they reached the site, the ground beneath their feet felt different, hollow. The scanner confirmed it. A structure lay buried beneath the ice, its design unmistakably artificial. "It's here," Darius whispered, awe creeping into his voice. The team worked tirelessly for hours, using plasma cutters and drills to carve through the thick ice. Slowly, the shape of a massive door emerged, its surface etched with symbols that glowed faintly as if responding to their presence. Elena knelt beside the door, brushing ice shards away with her gloved hand. "This is old tech, older than anything we've seen before. It's still active, though. Incredible." Darius knelt beside her, his breath catching as he traced the symbols with his fingers. "These markings, they're consistent with pre-colonial myths. They say she was entombed here after the Great Wars, to protect her and humanity's last hope." "She?" Elena asked, raising an eyebrow. "Aurelia," Darius said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The warrior princess. The heart of eternity was her gift, her power. She gave everything to save humanity, but her heart stopped in the final battle. They sealed her here, waiting for a time when she'd be needed again." The skepticism in Elena's eyes softened, replaced by curiosity. She'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had, but they were tales for children. Legends, not history. And yet, here they were, standing before evidence that the stories might be true. With a hiss of escaping air, the door began to slide open. A faint blue glow spilled out, illuminating the faces of the team. Inside was a chamber unlike anything they had seen, a mix of crystalline walls and ancient machinery humming with energy. At the center of the room lay a cryopod, its glass frosted over but intact. Inside, a figure was barely visible, curled in a peaceful slumber. Darius approached cautiously, his heart pounding. He wiped away the frost, revealing the woman within. Her face was serene, her features sharp yet graceful. Her golden hair, though dulled by time, seemed to shimmer faintly in the light. "That's her," Darius said, his voice trembling. "Aurelia." The room fell silent. Even Ryan, who had followed reluctantly, stood in quiet awe. Elena broke the silence. The systems are still functional. We could revive her. Darius nodded, his decision already made. Do it. Alina hesitated. If she's been in stasis for 1,000 years, waking her could be dangerous, for her and for us. We don't know what she'll remember, or what she's capable of. Darius placed a hand on the cryopod, his resolve unshaken. If she's who the legends say she is, we don't have a choice. Humanity needs her. As Alina began the revival sequence, a hum filled the air, growing louder and more intense. The crew braced themselves, their breaths held in anticipation. And then, with a shudder, Aurelia's eyes opened. The air inside the chamber crackled with tension. Darius could barely breathe as he watched the once still figure inside the cryopod stir. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft sound, like the whisper of ancient machinery coming to life, filled the room. Slowly, the pod's glass began to clear as the frost melted away, revealing Aurelia in full. Her eyes fluttered open, the color of deep jade flashing briefly before she blinked in confusion. She looked around, her gaze sharp despite the fog of sleep lingering in her mind. Her breathing quickened, and she jerked upright, her hands slamming against the glass, as if trying to push her way out. "Easy, easy," Darius called out, rushing forward. She turned to him, her expression one of fierce alarm, as though she was ready to fight, ready to defend herself from any threat. But Darius stood there, hands raised in a peaceful gesture, his voice calm. "You're safe. We're not here to hurt you." Aurelia's eyes narrowed, scanning him with precision, as if trying to read his every word, his every movement. For a moment, the tension in the room was unbearable. The others stood back, waiting, unsure of what to expect. Finally, her voice broke the silence, low and cautious. "Where am I? Who are you?" Darius hesitated, unsure of how to explain, but then he answered, his voice steady. "You're on the Celestial Venture, a ship from the future. We found you here, in this chamber. You've been in stasis for over 1,000 years." Her eyes widened at the mention of time. She blinked again, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. 1,000 years, she murmured. "No, that cannot be. The wars, my people." Darius saw her struggling to piece together the fragments of memory, and he stepped forward cautiously. "We know what happened. You were a hero, the last of your kind. Your heart, your power, was part of a legend we've been searching for. You stopped the war. You gave everything." Her face softened, but only for a moment. Then, like a switch, it hardened once more, and she glared at him. "No, that is not possible. I failed. I died. I gave my heart to the battle." "No," Darius said gently. "You were preserved here, waiting for a time when humanity needed you again. That time is now." Aurelia's mind raced as her memories tried to reassemble themselves. She remembered the final battle, the one where her body had given up. The war had been too great. The losses had been too much. She had thought she had given everything, that she had died alongside her people. But here, in this strange future, she had been saved. I was not meant to wake," she said, more to herself than to Darius. "I was meant to rest, to wait until humanity had found peace." She shook her head, standing shakily on her feet. "But it is clear that peace has not come. You say this war is still ongoing." Darius nodded. "Yes, a new threat has emerged, an enemy known as the Nyx Dominion. They're bent on conquering what remains of humanity. We're losing." Aurelia's gaze hardened once more. The spark of her old self, powerful, unyielding, a leader who had fought for the survival of her people, began to flicker back into life. Her chest tightened as memories of the war, the death, and the destruction surged in her mind. "What is this ship?" Aurelia demanded, her voice sharp. "Where are the rest of your people?" Darius explained quickly, detailing the rise of the colonies, the fall of old civilizations, and the struggles of humanity's scattered descendants. But when he spoke of the Nyx Dominion's relentless assault, a fire ignited in Aurelia's eyes. "They must be stopped," she said firmly, her voice now strong with the weight of authority. "You do not understand. I gave everything. My life, my heart, for this cause. If humanity is to survive, we must act. You must act." Before Darius could respond, Captain Holt's voice crackled over the comms. "Quinn, report. What's going on in there? Are we bringing her back to the ship?" "We've woken her up," Darius replied. "And she's not happy about it. She remembers." "Good," Ryan said, though his voice sounded more cautious than pleased. "We'll need her strength, but we need answers too." Darius turned back to Aurelia, who was now looking at the holographic star maps projected by the ship. She was already studying them, analyzing, calculating. Despite the confusion of her awakening, there was no mistaking the intensity in her eyes. She was back, and she was already taking charge. "I've seen these stars before," she said softly. "This is the same sky, though it has changed. The enemy, the Nyx, they are not new. They are shadows of an older threat, one I fought long ago. But I failed. Now, I will not." Darius approached her, his voice gentle. "Aurelia, we don't have much time. We need to move quickly. Will you help us?" Aurelia turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "I will help you," she said, the words ringing with authority. "But we do this my way. We do this together." With those words, a new alliance was forged. Darius Quinn had awakened a legend, and Aurelia, humanity's greatest hope, was ready to fight once more. The celestial venture glided through the stars, its sleek hull cutting through the void as it raced toward the coordinates Darius and Aurelia had pinpointed. Aurelia had spent the past several hours studying the star maps and ancient texts Darius had gathered. Her mind worked like a well-oiled machine, effortlessly piecing together information. The more she saw, the clearer it became. The enemy she had fought in the past was not entirely gone. The Nyx Dominion was the latest form of a much older threat, a group of invaders who had haunted the galaxy for centuries, taking whatever they pleased. She stood on the ship's bridge, watching the view outside. The stars glittered like tiny diamonds, cold and distant. But in her mind, she saw something different. Old, forgotten memories of battles fought, of people lost. She could still feel the weight of the armor on her shoulders, the sting of the last battle, and the heartbreak of seeing her people fall. "We're not ready for this," Captain Ryan Holt's voice broke her concentration. He was standing by the console, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen. "These Nyx Dominion, they're powerful. How can we fight them with just us?" Aurelia turned to him, her expression hardening. "I fought a war much like this one. We can do it because we must. We have no choice but to fight." "I'm not questioning your ability," Ryan said quickly, though his tone was filled with concern. "But we're talking about a galaxy-wide force. We're just a small ship with a handful of people." Darius, who had been watching the exchange quietly, spoke up. "She's right. We may not be the strongest, but we have something they don't. A chance to strike before they can consolidate their power. Aurelia, you know their tactics, don't you?" Aurelia's eyes narrowed as she thought. "The Nyx Dominion is built on deception and fear. They'll invade without warning, strike fast, and take what they need, all while keeping the galaxy in chaos. Their strength is in their numbers, and their fearsome warriors, shadow breakers. But they also rely on weakness. They will spread their forces thin, and when they do, will strike." Darius smiled, feeling the hope return. "So we can outsmart them. We don't have to fight them head-on." "Exactly," Aurelia said, her voice growing more certain. "We need to find their weak points, target their supply lines, and disrupt their plans. If we can do that, we'll have a chance." Ryan listened to her and finally nodded, though the worry in his eyes hadn't completely faded. "All right, but we still don't have much intel. We need to know more about their current position." Darius stepped forward. That's what we're going to find out. We've tracked a fleet of Nyx ships moving toward a nearby system. We need to get there first. Aurelia's gaze shifted to the screen, her sharp eyes scanning the data. I know this system. There's a planet there. Jara 9. It was once a thriving colony. If the Nyx are going there, they must be after something important. Elena Torres, the ship's engineer, walked onto the bridge with a clipboard in hand. We've checked the ship's systems. We'll be ready to jump in just under 6 hours. But after that, we'll need to be prepared for anything. Aurelia turned to Elena, giving her a respectful nod. Thank you. You've done well to keep the celestial venture in one piece. We'll need to move quickly once we get there. Elena gave a small, appreciative smile, but said nothing. She had seen the strength in Aurelia, and felt a new sense of resolve stirring within her. She wasn't sure what they were up against, but if Aurelia had faced it before, they had a chance. The crew worked together, preparing for their next move. Aurelia spent most of the time reviewing the tactical data, her mind calculating the best way to approach the Nyx Dominion's forces. As the hours passed, the tension grew, but so did their resolve. As they neared the Jara 9 system, the stars around them seemed to change. There was something different about this place, an eerie silence that hung in the air. The planet loomed ahead, a once bustling world now eerily still. The surface was scared, with massive craters dotting the landscape, evidence of past battles. Aurelia's voice was steady as she issued orders. Prepare for landing. We don't know what we'll find down there, but we must be ready for anything. We need to find out what the Nyx Dominion wants with Jara 9. Understood, Captain Holt said, turning to his crew. All hands, prepare for landing. Elena, get us into position. Darius, keep an eye on our sensors. The ship descended toward Jara 9, its thrusters roaring as they cut through the planet's thin atmosphere. As they neared the surface, the crew saw a fleet of Nyx ships in the distance, hovering above a massive structure. It looked like a base, dark, ominous, and heavily guarded. This is it, Darius said, his voice tense. They're here. Aurelia stood tall, her eyes focused on the base below. She knew this was just the beginning. The Nyx Dominion had made their move, and now it was time to act. We move quickly, she said. Get in, get the information, and get out. No unnecessary risks. The ship touched down just outside the base, its landing gear crunching against the dry soil. As the hatch opened, the cold wind of Jara 9 rushed in. Aurelia's boots hit the ground with a soft thud as she led the team out into the desolate landscape. Ahead of them, the Nyx Dominion's presence was undeniable. The base loomed like a dark sentinel, guarding its secrets. But Aurelia was ready. She had faced enemies like this before, and she wasn't about to lose again. The winds of Jara 9 howled around the team as they moved toward the Nyx Dominion's base. The ground beneath their boots crunched with each step, the air thick with dust, and the faint smell of burning metal. The planet's surface, once a thriving colony, now lay in ruins, pockmarked by explosions and scarred by years of conflict. Aurelia's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, her every sense alert. This planet had been a place of peace once, and now it was a battleground. Darius, walking just behind her, could feel the tension building. The crew had trained for moments like this, but nothing could have prepared them for the scale of what lay ahead. The Nyx Dominion was a force unlike any they had faced before. Their technology, their warriors, everything about them screamed danger. Keep it tight, Aurelia said in a low, commanding tone. Her voice held the authority of someone who had led armies into battle and survived the most terrifying of wars. We move quietly and quickly. No unnecessary risks. We can't afford to alert them. The team nodded, their footsteps muffled by the heavy dust beneath their boots. Elena Torres, the ship's engineer, checked the portable scanner in her hands, her brow furrowed in concentration. I'm not picking up any active signals yet, Elena said, her voice tense. But their communications could be cloaked. We need to move carefully. Captain Holt, who had been walking at the rear of the group, eyed the base ahead. It was massive, a dark fortress rising from the ground like a steel giant. The walls were lined with energy shields that flickered faintly, making it clear that any attempt to break in by force would be met with overwhelming resistance. "We don't have the firepower to take them head-on," Ryan muttered, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. "We need to get in, find what they're after, and get out." Aurelia nodded, her gaze never leaving the base. "Exactly. Darius, what's the status of the intel?" Darius held up a small device, displaying the encrypted data they had gathered earlier. "The Nyx Dominion is after something here, but we don't know what. The readings indicate high energy levels, possibly some sort of weapon or power source. We need to get inside and find out." They approached the perimeter of the base, where a series of large, jagged rocks provided some cover. Aurelia crouched low, her eyes scanning the area. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. "We're getting close," Darius whispered, looking at the device in his hand. "There's an entrance up ahead, but it's heavily guarded." "I'll take care of the guards," Aurelia said. Her tone was final, and no one doubted her ability. She had faced far worse than this, and her confidence was contagious. Ryan turned to her, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "Are you sure? We'll need a plan." Aurelia gave him a small smile. "I have a plan. You stay back with the others. Let me handle this." With that, she moved out from behind the rocks, moving like a shadow in the dust. Her movements were graceful, calculated, every step taken with purpose. She was a master of stealth, and even the slightest sound seemed to vanish in her wake. As she neared the entrance, two Nyx guards stood in front of a heavy door, their backs to her. Their armored suits glinted under the dim light of the planet's dying sun. Aurelia didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, she pulled a small, silenced pistol from her belt and aimed it at the guards. 2 shots rang out, quick and precise. The guards collapsed silently to the ground. Darius and the others, watching from their position, breathed a collective sigh of relief. They knew that Aurelia was a force to be reckoned with, but seeing her in action was something else entirely. There was no question. This was her battlefield. Aurelia quickly moved to the door, pressing a small device to the surface. Within moments, the door hissed open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. The faint hum of machinery echoed from within. "All right, let's move," she said, her voice calm. "Stay close." They entered the base, the heavy door closing behind them with a soft thud. The air inside was colder, filled with the scent of metal and ozone. The walls were lined with sleek, black panels, and dim lights flickered overhead. The deeper they went, the more they felt the weight of the place. This was no ordinary base. It felt like a stronghold, a place of great power. "This is it," Darius said, his voice barely a whisper as they moved down the hall. "Whatever the Nyx Dominion is after, it's here." They reached a large chamber at the center of the base. The room was massive, its walls lined with rows of machinery and strange, glowing devices. At the far end of the room, a large vault stood, guarded by several Nyx soldiers. Aurelia looked at the vault, and then at the team. "This is the heart of their operation. We need to get in, find what they're after, and leave before they notice we're here." Ryan gave a nod. "We're ready. Let's make it quick." Aurelia took a deep breath. She was no stranger to danger, but the stakes had never been this high. She moved forward, her mind focused, her every sense alert. The fate of humanity was in their hands now. As they approached the vault, Darius whispered, "I've got the security codes. We can access it from here." He pulled out a small device and began working quickly. The team stood ready, their weapons drawn, every movement calculated. They knew that at any moment, the Nyx soldiers could discover them. And when they did, there would be no turning back. The countdown began. The cold hum of the base seemed to grow louder as Darius worked quickly at the security terminal, his fingers flying over the keys. The team stood motionless, barely breathing, their eyes darting to every shadow. They all knew that time was running out. The vault was just ahead, and if they didn't get in quickly, the Nyx Dominion's forces could find them. Darius muttered to himself as the countdown on his device ticked down. The seconds felt like hours. The door to the vault was reinforced with the most advanced locking system he had ever seen. But he wasn't worried. He'd broken into far more secure places in his time. Still, this was different. If the Nyx were after something hidden in that vault, it could change everything. "We've got company," Ryan whispered, his voice tight with tension. "I can hear footsteps." Aurelia's eyes narrowed as she looked toward the hallway. "Stay calm," she said, her voice as steady as a mountain. "We can't afford to be detected." "Darius, how much longer?" "Just a few more seconds," Darius replied, his face focused, sweat beading on his forehead. He could hear the footsteps, too, growing louder. The door was nearly unlocked, but with every second that passed, the risk grew. Suddenly, a loud beep echoed in the room. The security door to the vault slid open with a soft hiss. Darius didn't wait for a second invitation. He grabbed the device, tucked it into his jacket, and motioned for the team to move. "Let's go," Aurelia ordered, her voice sharp. They moved swiftly through the open door, entering the vault's inner chamber. The walls were lined with high-tech storage units, each glowing with faint blue lights. The room smelled faintly of chemicals and old metal, and the low buzz of machinery echoed through the space. At the center of the room stood a massive container, sealed tightly and surrounded by several smaller devices that hummed with power. Aurelia's eyes locked onto it immediately. She knew this had to be what the Nyx were after. "This is it," Darius said, stepping toward the container. "Whatever they want, it's in there." Aurelia approached the container cautiously, her gaze fixed on it. "Let's find out what's inside." Ryan scanned the room for any movement, his hand still on his weapon. "We need to move fast. We're not alone in here for long." As Aurelia reached the container, she began to study the locks. They were intricate, designed to prevent even the most skilled thieves from getting inside. But Aurelia was no ordinary thief. Her hands moved with confidence, manipulating the locks with practiced ease. The others watched as the container's locks began to release one by one, a soft click signaling their success. Finally, the last lock released, and the container lid began to rise. Aurelia took a deep breath before slowly lifting it, her eyes narrowing as the container revealed its contents. Inside was a small glowing sphere, its surface shifting with swirling colors. It was beautiful, but also terrifying. "What is that?" Elena whispered, her voice filled with awe. "I don't know," Aurelia replied, her voice low. "But it's powerful. Too powerful." Darius stepped closer, inspecting the sphere with a mixture of curiosity and caution. This could be what the Nyx Dominion is after. If they get their hands on this, they could have control over every system in the galaxy. The team exchanged uneasy glances. They had known the stakes were high, but now they saw just how high. Whatever this sphere was, it was more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. Aurelia closed the container slowly, her mind racing. "We need to get this back to the ship. If the Nyx Dominion wants it, we can't leave it here. We'll take it with us." But as she moved to close the vault, a sudden noise echoed through the chamber, a loud clank, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots marching. The Nyx soldiers had found them. Aurelia's hand shot out to stop the team from moving. "Get to the exit. Now," she commanded, her voice low but filled with urgency. The group quickly moved toward the door, but before they could reach it, it slid shut with a violent clang, trapping them inside. The lights flickered, and the hum of the machinery grew louder, as if reacting to the sudden shift in the atmosphere. "We're locked in," Ryan said, his voice tense. This was too easy. Aurelia turned to the others. "We have to fight our way out. No other choice." Darius looked at her, his expression serious. You're right. We don't have time to think. We need to get to the ship and move. Now. As the sound of approaching soldiers grew louder, Aurelia made a quick decision. I'll hold them off. You take the sphere and get to the ship. I'll catch up. No, Darius said, shaking his head. We're not splitting up. We stay together. Aurelia's gaze softened for a moment, but her resolve remained unshaken. It's the only way. If we're going to survive, we need to move quickly. Trust me. Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with respect. We trust you. Without another word, Aurelia moved toward the door, positioning herself between her team and the advancing Nyx soldiers. She wasn't afraid. She'd faced worse. The soldiers would soon realize that facing her was a mistake. The team readied themselves, the weight of the sphere in their hands. The fate of humanity, and possibly the entire galaxy, rested on what happened next. The sound of marching boots grew louder, and Aurelia's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she remained focused. She had been in tighter situations before, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher, and the Nyx dominion was ruthless. There was no room for error. The team was just behind her, their faces tense with determination. Darius gripped the glowing sphere in his hands, his eyes constantly darting toward the door. The Nyx soldiers would be at the vault any moment now. They couldn't afford to waste another second. Aurelia signaled for the team to move forward. We don't have much time. Stay low and stay together. With that, they sprinted for the door, but just as they reached it, the heavy metal barriers slammed down with a deafening clang. The room was sealed. Damn it, Ryan hissed, his hands trying to force the door open. It's locked. We're trapped. Aurelia quickly assessed their options. The door wasn't going to open on its own, but there was another way out, an emergency exit in the back of the vault. It was a risk, but they had no choice. Follow me, she ordered, her voice cutting through the panic. We're going for the back exit. The team moved swiftly, cutting through the large chamber with the heavy humming machines surrounding them. The glow of the sphere in Darius's hands was the only light that illuminated their path. Every footstep seemed louder than the last as they approached the rear of the room. As they rounded a corner, the sudden sight of the Nyx soldiers appeared like shadows in the distance. There were at least a dozen of them, all armed with powerful energy weapons and wearing dark, sleek armor. Aurelia's instincts kicked in, and she signaled the team to take cover behind a nearby pillar. We need to move before they spot us, she whispered. Stay low and be quiet. They crouched behind the pillar, their breath shallow, every muscle tense. Aurelia peeked around the corner, her sharp eyes studying the soldiers. They were too close. If they didn't move soon, they'd be discovered. This is bad, Elena whispered. There's no way we're getting past them without being noticed. Aurelia's eyes narrowed as she scanned the room. She could see another exit just beyond the group of soldiers, but it was heavily guarded. A direct fight wasn't an option, not without risking the mission and their lives. We don't fight them directly, Aurelia said, her mind working quickly. We use their own security against them. Ryan raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Aurelia turned toward Darius. You have that device, right? The one we use to open the vault. We need to hack into the base's security systems. If we disable the alarms and the door locks, we can slip past them undetected. Darius nodded quickly, pulling out the device. I can do that, but it'll take a minute. We'll have to hold off until then. Do it, Aurelia said firmly. We'll cover you. The soldiers were now only a few meters away, their voices low and muffled by the sound of the machinery in the room. The tension was unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity. Darius knelt behind a piece of equipment, plugging the device into the base's control panel. I'm in, Darius muttered. His fingers moved quickly over the controls. I'm bypassing their security systems now. The Nyx soldiers were moving closer. Aurelia's heart pounded in her chest as she watched them, her hand resting on the handle of her sidearm. They would need to act fast. Darius's fingers flew over the panel, sweat dripping from his forehead. "I've disabled the alarms," Darius said, his voice tight. "The lock's next." Aurelia motioned for the team to move as quietly as possible. She counted the seconds in her mind, hoping the soldiers wouldn't spot them. It felt like a lifetime before Darius finally spoke again. "Done." The doors unlocked. "Go," Aurelia commanded. The team moved in a blur, darting for the exit with Aurelia at the front, covering their backs. The doors slid open quietly, and they poured out into the corridor beyond. They didn't look back. They couldn't afford to. But just as they rounded the corner, a loud clank echoed behind them, the sound of the soldiers realizing something was wrong. Aurelia's pulse quickened. They had seconds before the alarms would trigger again, and they needed to get to the ship. Fast. "Move, move, move," she shouted, urging her team forward. The hallway was narrow, and every turn felt like it brought them closer to danger. But the ship was just ahead, out of the base and into the open air. They had to make it there. If they could reach the celestial venture, they could escape. Suddenly, the sharp crack of energy weapons fired in the distance. The Nyx soldiers were catching up. Ryan fired a shot back, creating a small diversion, allowing the team to keep running. "Aurelia, they're getting closer." Elena yelled, her voice filled with panic. Aurelia glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the darkening hallway. The soldiers were nearly on them. They wouldn't be able to outrun them much longer. She needed a plan. Without hesitation, she turned sharply into a small side passage. "This way," she ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The team followed her lead, moving fast and keeping low. Aurelia's heart raced as she took another sharp turn, leading them down a forgotten hallway that she hoped would lead to an exit. Behind them, the sound of the Nyx soldiers' pursuit grew louder. "Almost there," Aurelia whispered. They rounded the final corner, and the sight of the ship's landing bay came into view. The celestial venture was just a few hundred meters away, waiting for them. But the soldiers were closing in fast. The celestial venture loomed just ahead, its sleek form standing tall against the darkness of Jara 9. The landing bay's doors were wide open, the ship's engines already humming with life, waiting for the team. But the soldiers of the Nyx Dominion were closing in fast. Aurelia's heart raced in her chest as she pushed the team forward, urging them to move faster. "Keep going," she shouted, her voice cutting through the cold air. "We're almost there." Darius, still holding the glowing sphere, glanced over his shoulder. "They're gaining on us." "We don't stop," Aurelia replied firmly, her focus unshaken. "Get to the ship now." The sound of boots pounding on the metal floors grew louder, echoing through the empty hallways. Aurelia didn't dare to look back. She kept her eyes fixed on the open doors of the ship, knowing that once they reached it, they would have a chance to escape. But they had to make it there first. Elena, panting from the run, turned to Aurelia. "We're not going to outrun them much longer." Aurelia's mind raced as she ran. They were so close, but the soldiers were relentless. She had to buy them time. She had to make sure the team made it to safety. "Ryan, can you slow them down?" she called without breaking stride. Ryan, running just behind, nodded and reached for his weapon. He didn't need to be told twice. With one quick motion, he turned, firing a blast of energy at the hallway ahead. The shot rang out, sending a ripple of light through the air. The explosion from the blast created a temporary barrier of smoke and debris, blocking the path of the soldiers and giving the team a few precious seconds to push forward. "Go," Ryan shouted, his voice tight with urgency. The team didn't hesitate. They sprinted the final stretch toward the ship, the doors of the celestial venture in sight. The ship's engines roared louder as they neared, the sound almost deafening now. They were so close. But just as they reached the threshold of the landing bay, a sharp crack of gunfire echoed from behind them. Aurelia spun around, her instincts kicking in as she drew her sidearm. A group of Nick's soldiers had emerged from the smoke, their weapons trained on them. "We're not going to make it," Elena cried, her voice filled with panic. Aurelia's mind worked quickly. She needed to get the team onto the ship, but they were trapped between the soldiers and the ship's entrance. She looked at the others, their faces tense, knowing they all shared the same thought. There was no way they could all escape without a fight. "Darius, get inside," Aurelia shouted. "Now." Darius hesitated for a moment, his eyes wide with concern for her. "What about you?" "Go," she ordered again, her voice sharp. "I'll hold them off." Without another word, Darius turned and ran into the ship, the others following close behind. Aurelia stayed behind, her eyes never leaving the soldiers that were closing in. She could see the way they moved, precise, professional, and deadly. But she was ready. She'd been in tougher situations than this. As the last of the team entered the ship, Aurelia fired a warning shot, aiming to disorient the soldiers. The shot hit the floor between them, creating a flash of light and sending the Nick soldiers stumbling back. The moment of confusion was all she needed. She ducked into the ship, her heart pounding, just as the door slammed shut behind her. The soldiers were almost on top of them, but they had made it. They were inside. "Go, get us out of here," Aurelia shouted to the pilot. Captain Holt didn't need to be told twice. He immediately activated the ship's engines, and with a violent shake, the celestial venture lifted off the ground, rising swiftly into the air. Through the viewport, Aurelia watched as the base and the soldiers grew smaller, disappearing into the distance. "We did it," Ryan said, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. "We're out." Aurelia exhaled, allowing herself a brief moment to relax. They had escaped. The team was safe, for now, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Nyx Dominion wouldn't stop looking for them. The sphere in Darius's hands was far too powerful, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim it. But for now, they had won. She turned to the team, her expression serious. "This isn't over. We need to figure out what that sphere is and why they want it so badly. The Nyx Dominion won't give up, and we need to stay one step ahead." Darius nodded, the glow of the sphere reflecting in his eyes. "I agree. We've only just begun to understand what it can do." Aurelia looked out the viewport, the stars twinkling in the distance. Their journey was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and the enemies they faced were formidable. But with the team she had by her side, she felt a sense of hope. They would fight together. They would survive. And they would uncover the truth behind the mysterious sphere. "We'll figure it out," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "Together."